Duskmourn is an awesome set, and we're going over the 7 strongest commanders right now.
I'm Mia, and I'm going to go play dress up later.
I'm Beastie. I'm wearing a shirt with myself on it. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. Now, if you're thinking that you want to buy Magic cards and support the Nitpicking Nerds channel that you love so much and watch all the time at the same time, you can do that through the link in our description. It shows you what cards we're personally recommending that you would buy recently, and you can buy anything singles product from the site.
They also have sealed stuff for Duskmourn, whether that be the precons or just packs that you want to draft with your friends. There's also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
Nerds
at checkout, you can save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order. That includes the Sleeve Crafter sleeves, where you can put whatever you want within reason on a sleeve.
We have put some pretty ridiculous things on sleeves, and I'm very happy to have all of them. They are very fun. They're keepsakes, even when you've unsleeved the deck that they're in.
We're also sponsored by Moxville, but not now, later, because if you said you got it and you didn't, you're wrong. Anyways, we also have a Patreon where you can see some very cool gameplay from Spell Table from us, and also we'll look at your decks and tell you what's wrong with them, and a bunch of other things.
That's a great way to get some extra Nitpicking Nerds into your life. But we've got the 7 strongest commanders from Duskmourn. We're going to talk about what kind of decks they make as well. So the commanders and their decks, what you can expect to see, maybe a little taste of the deck if you're trying to build around this card or you're thinking this card looks interesting. I do want to say, there are only 27 new commanders between Duskmourn and the Duskmourn Commander product, which is both of what we're looking at. That's super refreshing.
I am so happy to just see that in general. I feel like sometimes I'm just overloaded with choices for a commander, but seeing 27 among both products is super nice.
Yeah, you talk about Dominaria United had 60 or 70. Lord of the Rings had, I think...
There was so much.
It was either 90 or 110, just something ridiculous. So it's nice to have a palatable number of legends I can look at. They're all very interesting. They're all cool. We do want to throw one honorable mention down because I didn't think it didn't quite crack this list, but there's something here. It's Nico, Light of Hope. This is the card that makes shards, and then you can exile a creature and turn your shards into it. So maybe there's some kind of flicker thing you want to do with this. You want to flicker Nico to get 4 shards and then play something and turn the shards into it.
I think that it doesn't have timing restrictions, which makes it pretty cool, because I feel like there's been so many things lately that have had activate only as a sorcery stapled onto it. So I do love the fact that you can do it whenever. And if there's a way to maybe give Nico haste, with what's it called, with 1,000-Year Elixir or something, and then untap him, that might be an option. But I feel like there's not that much shard support, so getting to that point, you'd have to flicker them a bunch of times and then also go in and then find the creature that you want to copy. I feel like that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I've seen 2 really cool cards that work with Nico. They really work well with Hero of Bladehold, because each, if you have, let's say the magic number is 4 shards, you get 4 shards, turn them all into Hero of Bladeholds. You've got 4 battle cries, 8 attacking soldiers, and that's just crazy. And also Combat Calligrapher. Let's say you have 4 of those. If you attack each of your opponents once, each of the opponents gets 4 2/1s also coming at them. There's some really cool stuff. I just don't know if there's enough of it to make a really cool deck. So Nico gets the honorable mention slot, and we're going to move on to our first actual entry. This is the Jolly Balloon Man. 1 red-white for a 3/3, notably, very importantly, with haste. 1 tap, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control, except it's a 1/1 red balloon in addition to its other colors and types, and it's flying in haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery.
I think this guy is super cool. I mean, first off, the artwork is Junji Ito inspired, and I think that's amazing. But just being able to copy a bunch of cool creatures, and they also have flying, so they can usually swing in without damage, and then sacrifice triggers, I think there's a lot to do with this.
Yeah, this is it's Kiki Jiki, but with the added fairness of having to pay 1 mana. But of course we can still combo. We're going to get into that because there is a combo nature to this deck. But the first thing I think that you're going to be looking for is a payoff for when you make balloons. We don't even care what we make yet, but we want to make sure that whenever we put a balloon out, we get some kind of effect. So Agate Instigator is perfect. It's 1 in a red for a 1/3, Offspring 1 in a red, so you get a second one that is a 1/1. And whenever another creature you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. And of course, if you have 2 of them, now each creature entering deals 2. That makes our balloons just chip in over time.
I mean, I love Agate Instigator. It's Impact Tremor stapled onto a creature, and sometimes 2 if you have enough mana for it. And then if you tap the Jolly Balloon Man and get 3, that is good.
I mean, now we're talking, because then the 2 that came out deal 1, and anything you do future deals 3. Like we're just getting into heavy damage. As for things to copy, first one I always think of in like Boros decks that are starving for mana ramp is Solemn Simulacrum. It's 4 mana 2/2. ETB, go find a basic, put it into play. When it dies, you draw a card. So I can play one, get the land, great, copy it, get a second land. But unlike some of the other cards that make tokens, some of them exile. This just sacrifices. So I still get the dies trigger of the Sad Robot token.
That is super nice. I feel like sometimes Boros decks really have a hard time getting that card draw and getting those lands. So this is an awesome way to utilize your commander while also being able to, have some very playable creatures in your deck.
I'm also just now thinking about practically how you would play this deck. And obviously, you would get your dry erase tokens, and you would draw a balloon, and then you put the face of whatever creature it is. That would make for some pretty artistic stuff.
Don't ask me to draw the Solemn Simulacrum.
I might have to do this. I don't know. That's pretty good. Next up, we're trying to untap the Balloon Man. He's great once, but like once you start doing it multiple times, he gets pretty busted. So we're going to use things like Village Bellringer, 2 and a white, 1/4 flash, ETB, untap all creatures you control. So we pay 1, tap the Balloon Man, a copy of Village Bellringer. Oh, that balloon triggers, untaps our Balloon Man. Now we can do this for as much mana as we have to get that many 1/1 balloons, or that many triggers on some ETB, or maybe if we can somehow manage to get some mana off of this, we can just combo.
This is a great way to put in Ashnod's Altar, 3 mana for an artifact. If you sacrifice a creature, you add colorless, which is double the amount of mana that you'd need to actually use the Jolly Balloon Man. So if you sacrifice the tokens that come in, and you keep making Village Bellringer, you untap him, high miso, and you keep getting to pay that cost. So you get unlimited ETB triggers if you have things like Agate Instigator out, or unlimited die triggers if you have something else for payoffs.
Yep, so that works out pretty well. That's a nice self-contained combo because it involves creatures that you're playing in the deck anyway, your commander, which you're happy to play anyway, and then you have like Village Bellringer, which is, I would say, normally a subpar card, but when you can use it to just get the next best ETB of your creature anyway, it's kind of not that bad. And then Ashnod's Altar, which is never bad. So we've got this, 3 or 4 card combo. Every single card is usable and playable in the deck. There's no duds. And that makes for a really scary concoction because you're going to have to wonder now every game you play against the Jolly Balloon Man, how close are they to comboing? How many pieces do they need?
I hope you build this. It looks so much fun, and if you don't build him, I will.
Okay, one of us is going to have Jolly Balloon Man for Magic Vegas. You count on that.
The next one is a home run in here. It's Eartha Joe, Frontier Mentor. 2 red-white for a 2/4. When it enters, create a 1/1 mercenary token that you can tap to give extra stats at sorcery speed. But whenever you activate an ability that targets a creature or player, you copy it, and you could choose new targets for that copy. Obviously, you're going to be copying your best creatures. Why not do it twice with her? This sounds great.
I love these sort of really specific uncommons when they slot into the 99 of a deck. Thank you for the licks, Miso. But what this one does also is it's another combo piece you have to keep track of. If they have a creature that taps for mana or makes a treasure when it enters, and they have Eartha Joe, and they have Village Bellringer, well, now they can just start going, tap the Balloon Man, make a copy of my Treasure Maker and a copy of the Village Bellringer. Oops, untap my guy, get the mana back, and now you can deal with infinite haste balloons or 99 red balloons.
I think that usually Boros is lacking in the power, but this really brings it to the set. I'm very excited about that.
And if you have nothing better to do, you can always also just flicker Eartha Joe, get an extra mercenary. The other thing you have to watch out for in this deck is Ephemerate. White for an instant, you exile a creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. And this version of Flickering has Rebound, so when you cast it, it gets exiled. Then on your next upkeep, you cast it for free, so you get an extra little use out of it. There's a couple uses for this. Number one, it's a protection spell against removal for the Jolly Balloon Man, because he's going to be like a lightning rod. They're going to be throwing all they have at it, and you're going to have to protect it. So you can use it as a protection spell to flicker him and blank a removal spell with single target, or you can do that for any of your other ETB balloon, creatures.
Balloon targets.
Like your balloon targets, not the balloons themselves, but the creatures that will become balloons. They can be saved from removal and get the trigger again. So I can get an extra land out of a sad robot or whatever else. This is just a lot to keep track of. You can also activate Balloon Man at sorcery speed, get your balloon, Ephemerate him, untap him, he's got haste, and activate him at sorcery speed again to get another balloon.
I mean, it's so cheap to do this anyways. Whether you do it in defense or offense, it's a really great way to just get your extra triggers in here. There's going to be so many ETB triggers. I mean, that's what your deck is built around.
Yeah, I mean, you start to throw down like a giant creature like an Inferno Titan into the mix here. Now when I'm ephemerating, it's like 6 damage per activation of the Balloon Man when I'm getting these ETBs and, oh, okay, buddy. And also attacking with them. So I want to move on to the next card because this card I think it's one of those commander cards that will be cool in 1 in every 10 decks for the rest of time. It's Nesting Dovehawk, 3 and a white, 2/2 flyer. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you populate. Whenever a creature token enters, it gets a +1/+1 counter. This just gets silly. We've talked about this in the Zinnia Offspring deck, where like, oh, if you make a token copy of Nesting Dovehawk, it can populate itself, and then it just keeps exponentially going off. That's the same is true when you balloon it. You get a balloon token, and then if you Nesting Dovehawk, you'll now have 2 of them. You populate the balloon twice, but the balloon populates won't have that extra little caveat of dying at the end step. So you're just going to keep going up Dovehawks for the rest of time, and they all get bigger each time, so it's just going to be silly.
Plus, when you actually balloon the Dovehawk, it's going to get bigger, as Beastie said, but it also has haste, so it can swing in immediately. So if you can, do a bunch of the ephemerate things that we were talking about, or just make sure that more tokens come in, you can swing in and punch for really big damage really fast. And now, moving on to the next, boo! This is the Moxfield ad. I bet I scared you because I scared Beastie.
If I was in the Duskmourn house right now, I would be shivering. That's truly terrifying. Unlike Moxfield, because Moxfield is a calm, gentle presence. Moxfield, think of Moxfield like your glimmer, guiding you through the scary house. It's your point of contact for everything you need, knowing about your deck. Was that a sentence?
I think so. I mean, Moxfield just really helps me, guides me in the dark times when we're doing our booster pack deck, and we're doing 1 card at a time. That really helps me to tell whether I have a card in my deck or not.
Yeah, the next 100 boosters we open, one of those cards is going in a deck, and that's going to be our challenge. You can't do something weird like that without Moxfield to help you. So thank you, Moxfield. But we're going to go to our actual next commander. It's Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls. Not the mono black one. This is the red black one. 2 red black for a 4/4 flying with ward. Pay 2 life. Whenever an opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls, and draw a card.
I really like this. I think Group Slug is a super cool mechanic, but I also think that Rakdos has a hard time drawing cards at times. And usually it's just like Group Slug, okay, now what? Well, this helps you refill your hands and make him bigger so he can actually swing in for damage.
Yeah, we ranked this precon pretty low, and I think that was just a result of the precon not being very good, and not a result of Group Slug being bad, or us disliking Grouping Slug, or this card being bad. I think, this might be the redemption for him, because I think this deck has a lot going on when you just build it from scratch. First card, I mean, the first thing you want is to make some kind of... The first thing you want with this deck is to set up some kind of engine that would, in an ideal world, just automatically ping all of my opponents as soon as their turn starts. So I can just collect my card, protect Valgavoth, and move on my way. How about Roiling Vortex, 1 in a red for an enchantment? At the beginning of each player's upkeep, it just deals 1 damage to them. Well, that's convenient. And whenever a player casts a spell, if they cast it for free, it deals 5 damage to that player. That, I think, is real in this day and age when people are convoking and solituding and force of willing. And then you can pay red, and your opponents can't gain life this turn. They're going to forget about that, and they're going to get destroyed by it.
I mean, even as you said, Solitude and Force Will, those are higher power cards, but people are playing not only convoke spells in the lower to medium powers, there's also just cascade decks at the lower to medium powers. I think that it is very, very real, and the 1 damage people will not, I'm not going to say forget about, but I feel like there will be bigger threats on the board that they won't really take care of this or give it the attention it deserves until it's gone around a few times, and this came down on turn 2, and it's like, oh, we've all been hit for 5 from this thing that doesn't really do anything else.
The thing they're going to notice is that you're drawing a card every single time with Valgavoth. There's also Razorkin Needlehead. As we realize that we want to deal damage to our opponents every single turn, I think you kind of have to figure out what form of damage that's going to take. Like the precon had a million different ways to deal damage, triggering on a million different things. But I think you can pretty easily zero into between 1 and 3 things that you want your opponents to do that will trigger them taking damage from all your Group Slug. And one of the things you can do is card draw. So red for a 2/2 here. It is first strike during your turn. Whoopee. But whenever an opponent draws a card, it deals 1 damage to them straight up. So that's something that will trigger every turn no matter what.
I really like this because I feel like there are a lot of Group Slug cards that come in and they say deal a damage every time someone draws a card, but it also has the caveat of drawing people extra cards, and we don't want that. We want to be the only ones drawing extra cards from our effects. So I'm happy that we can include things like this and take out things like Spiteful Visions and that sort, so you can actually get the hurt effect without actually giving them more cards to deal with your things.
And that could be an entirely different thing that you zero in on. If you want to be the group slug deck that punishes people for drawing cards, that's great. Then all of your damage cards will be drawing matters, and you can play all of the wheels and the dark deals and the Wheel of Misfortune, whatever. You can play all that stuff and just destroy them. Shield Dread 2 will be another one. That's just one example. That's something you can maybe zero in on. Something you probably definitely want, though, Rug of Smothering. What a beating. 3 mana for a 1/3 flyer for an uncommon, too. Whenever a player casts a spell, they lose 1 life for each spell they've cast this turn. So your opponents cannot help but to lose life, because if they cast any spell, even an answer to Rug of Smothering or Valgavoth, they lose a life, trigger, draw a card.
I think this is pretty important that you are packing your decks with a lot of things that say your opponents can't gain life. I know the Precon had a couple of those, and we also just recommended one, but I am angry to the fact that I have lost multiple games, like 2 or 3, but still that's 2 or 3 more than I would have liked, to Rug of Smothering. It's annoying. It's really, really good. And if they're trying to find an answer and, casting their brainstorms and they're, there's, what's it called? Just whatever to really draw cards. It's just, they're going to be hitting for so much damage that they might be dead before they find an answer.
And then once they get down to below 10 life, especially since we're playing group slug, there's really not too many more actions they can even take in the game. Let's say they want to draw a card. Okay, take 2 damage from that. The spell you cast also deals 1 to you. Now you found an answer. Cool. Take 2 more damage. Now you're at 5. You answered the rug, but you're just going to lose.
Yeah, I think that is very, very important to make sure that you have multiple ways to be dealing damage across the board. But the next card in here is Ob Nixilis, Captive Kingpin. 2 red-black for a 4/3 Flampler. Whenever one or more opponents exactly lose 1 life, put a 1/1 counter on him, exile the top of your library. Until next end step, you can play that card. This is really awesome because it's going to let you churn through so much of your deck, because you're going to be exiling the top from all of the little effects that you have. Plus, Valgavoth is going to help you draw a card too. So I feel like you can go through at least 2/3 of your deck with just this and your commander.
Yeah, something that we want in Group Slug, but that was lacking from the Precon, is payoffs for making our opponents lose life and doing all this stuff so we can tie this deck together in some way. Here you go. Now whenever you ping them for 1, which is the most common number that Group Slug's ping for, I think, you just start drawing cards and he just gets huge, and he's going to be like a win con in and of himself.
There's going to be so much damage thrown around. It's going to be death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, we also have Bloodletter of Aclazotz. Speaking of paying off damage dealing, 1 black for a 2/4 flyer. If an opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that much life instead. So sure, we've got all of our little things going. Maybe some of them trigger on our turn, but just all of our creatures, all of our life loss. If you throw a Torment to Hailfire or something, this just supercharges it to the point that you chip them away, and now the way to actually win the game is you slam this for very few mana. It's only 4 mana, and then you take your turn as normal, and it's devastating.
Plus, just this with combat damage overall, it's like, okay, I guess you don't have to block my 2/2, but you're going to lose 4.
Yeah, or like, oh, you have an answer for it? You're going to lose twice as much life off of Rug of Smothering. Next up, Blood Chief Ascension. Black for an enchantment at the beginning of each end step. If an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, highly likely, you can put a quest counter on it, and then whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Blood Chief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, highly likely, they lose 2 life and you gain 2 life. Well, it's a May ability, but I don't know why you would ever say no.
This is going to come down super quickly, and whether it's from your group slug effects or just taking combat damage, people are going to be losing that 2 life, and you're going to get 3 quest counters on it in no time.
There's really no deck that this card is better in than this one. It's just absolutely obscene. They're going to take 2 damage from breathing. They're going to lose 2 life off of Shockland. They're going to get hit for 2 and forget that this was even on the battlefield. And then once this is gone, once this is all the way up, killing their creatures, sacrificing, milling, graveyard stuff, they're just going to die. And it's a great win condition that literally says spend 1 mana, play the game, and then they will have to figure out an answer.
This is going to be a threat so quickly, within a turn cycle or 2, depending on how punchy it is or how fast you get your threats down.
This next one is one of your favorites, actually, for this deck.
Yeah, it's the Great Unclean One. This is from Warhammer. 4 and a black for a 4/5. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses 2 life, which is already what you want to be doing. Then, for each opponent who has less life than you, create a 1/3 demon creature named Plague Bearer of Nurgle. I don't really know the lore behind that. However, I do like free stuff, and also I do like it when my opponents have less life than me, and that's always going to happen because most of they probably can't gain life with all of the things you're running, and also you're not the one getting hit for the most part.
The thing I like is that this Nurgle guy seems like really intimidating, but I cannot be scared of anyone named Nurgle, and so I think it's just adorable. But this is a great way to pay off you slugging everybody, taking on the life. You're going to be at 30, they're going to be at 8, and then great, you get a bunch of 1/3s, go up the ground and protect your life total some more.
I think Nurgle's the big guy, and these are the Plague Bearers.
That's what I mean. So like this Nurgle guy, he's got henchmen, he's got plague.
Yeah,
Like,
he's like the mob. He's like the Krenko mob boss of the Warhammer.
Anyone who's got plague bearers, he's got to be a serious guy.
Yeah, he's a cool guy.
But his name's
theory,
Nurgle.
in theory, I don't know.
As for some quick finishers for this deck, we're going to be packing Rakdos Charm. If anybody gets, flies too close to the sun, poof, you're dead. Price of Progress, if anyone's playing a deck that I built, poof, they're dead.
If you could always put in like Sunspine links too, that would hit people for a ton, and Beastie would also be dead.
Yeah.
It's really whatever you want.
Plenty of those big one-shot damage dealers also at home in this deck. What do we got next?
The next one is Kona, Rescue Beastie. He's adorable, and I think he's pretty powerful. 3 green for a 4/3. At the beginning of your second main phase, if he is tapped, you can put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. I think this is incredibly powerful because he doesn't need to be tapped from combat. He doesn't need to be tapped by paying mana, waiting for anything. It's just if you can find a way to tap him, whether that be through a Convoke spell or like crewing a vehicle or any certain way, you can put something out for free, and there are so many gigantic permanents that we want to cheat into the battlefield.
It's a pretty lenient effect, and this is also just going to now be in our command zone. It's not like an Elvish Piper, right, where you have to draw it and play this clunky cost that you can't guarantee to have. Guaranteed, we have this every single game on turn 3 or 4 because we're green, and we're going to be throwing down some just absolute haymakers. But the first thing we want to do is to make sure this guy can be tapped. And now, when we were looking this up, there's actually a million ways to do this that are very good. The first is like this type of janky mana dork that you normally never play. Loam Dryad. Green for a 1/2. Tap it and another untapped creature you control to add 1 mana. These cards kind of stink when you compare them to like Elvish Mystic, so no one ever plays them. But there's like 6 or 7 of these things. And when you're going to be playing Kona on turn 4 or turn 3 every single game, you just go tap it, tap Kona. Oh, look! I'm going to put down the best creature in my deck.
I feel like this is going to be so explosive if you see it in the command zone. The next one is Smuggler's Copter. 2 mana for a 3/3 that is a vehicle with flying. Whenever it attacks or blocks, you could draw a card. If you do, discard a card with crew 1. But Kona will crew it and very, very easily. And then, oh, look, he's tapped. Better put something gigantic out.
And these are 2 plays plus more because there's plenty of vehicles that do similar things that we're not going to touch on. We've already got like a group of 20 cards that come down before Kona and will guarantee tap Kona when you play it. And that just means all that's left is put 10 plus gigantic permanents in your deck, and your opponents are going to have to answer one of the best cards in Magic or one of the best green creatures you could possibly cheat out. And this is now also assuming they don't have an answer for Kona, right? Because in this world, I cheated out a permanent. You didn't answer Kona. But now how are you going to answer this and Kona? Because if you don't answer both, I'm just going to do it again next turn. It's ridiculous.
I feel like people might have to use their swords on like the bad mana dork that you just mentioned too, because like, oh no, I have to kill Kona, but also like a way to tap him, they could bring him back the next turn. I feel maybe I just have to kill the thing that lets him tap.
Yeah, there is a brief period where Kona's vulnerable to removal. Green also has a lot of ways to protect our boy, so it's going to be a give and take. One of the jankiest cards for this deck that I had to put in is Gather Courage. You've never heard of it. It's green for an instant with Convoke, so you can tap a creature, namely Kona, to pay for it since it's only 1 green. And target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Who cares what it does? This is a way to go, hey, I didn't draw one of my other things. My opponents maybe thought they were safe because I have 3 forests in play and nothing else. I can go turn 4, cast Kona, Convoke this, target, who cares? Now my creature's tapped. Go to my main phase. You guys didn't see this coming because you thought I had nothing. And boop, here's an Eldrazi.
I think this is funny because you could have put it in like Sundering Vitae or something like that, like a green spell with Convoke that people play. And you're like, I bet you've never heard of this one. Gather Courage. No, I haven't heard of this one. Thank you.
It's the surprise factor. You can play Sundering Vitae. It's a much better card. But this has the surprise of I can literally play nothing the whole game, Kona on turn 4, and then still cast this and still cheat out something. And your opponents will go, All right.
Like, I guess.
You got me.
But-
Gather courage.
But if we're going to cheat things out, we need big, scary things to cheat out. How about Nyx Bloom Ancient? 4 green, green, green for a 5/5 with trample. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times that amount instead. Getting this out on turn 3 or 4 is going to be devastating to your opponents.
Yeah, now they're faced with that same conundrum. Kill Nyx Bloom Ancient or kill Kona. If you kill Kona, that's probably good for you, because now I can't cheat anything else out. But I'll just cast it for its mana value because I have 16 mana going into my turn. There's no winning here. It's basically this is the green omniscience is what I've come to think of it.
I think Kona is spicy. I am so excited for all the cool things you could put out. Another one to put out is Regal Force. 4 green, green, green for a 5/5. When it enters, draw a card for each green creature you control. You're going to have all of your little mana dorks out in Kona, and then you're going to be drawing so many more cards than your opponents. Plus, you'll just have a 5/5 on the field before your opponents usually have many creatures out.
Very reasonable to go, turn 1, crappy mana dork. Turn 2, 2 more crappy mana dorks. Turn 3, Kona, trigger, Regal Force, draw 5. How are you going to beat that? I don't care what happens now. Even if you board wipe me, I am now I'm back even on all the cards I just spent.
You're just so much farther ahead than your opponents at that point. And I would expect this on turn 5 or 6. It's like, okay, well, that makes sense. But slapping this down turn 3 or 4, that's a little fast.
It's going to put a test on the game very quickly. The do you have removal test? Because if not, you're going to need to figure out something. It's going to be arch enemy real quick. And I honestly like our chances if we're cheating out Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. 10 mana, 12/12. When you cast it, draw 4. That does not trigger when you cheat it into play, but it does trigger when you cast it, and we are a big green deck that's going to be ideally casting all these monsters at some point. Annihilator 4, whenever this creature attacks, defending player sacrifices 4 permanents. Super easy ask on turn 4. You're going to have those no problem. They're going to be lands, though. And when Kozilek dies, it just shuffles your graveyard into your library.
I'm just trying to think. I was like, does this deck go faster than Sylvala? Because I feel like in certain situations, it might be able to.
Yeah, I mean, I could see... Even without fast mana, if we're just talking about mana dorks, turn 3 Kona, that's going to be your standard with all the mana dorks you have. And then Kozilek just in play turn 3, which means it'll be attacking on turn 4.
I think that this deck is going to be so explosive. And let's not forget another Convoke spell better than
Gather Courage?
Yeah, I was like,
How dare you?
Strengthen Courage? It's Chord of Calling. X green, green, green for an instant with Convoke. Search your library for a creature card with mana value X or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Well, if you have so many little creatures out anyways and you need a way to tap Kona, why not just get a giant creature from your library and then also put a big thing out from your hand?
I like it. It's either a very cheap Convoke spell, you can go find Dryad Arbor or a Mana Dork or something just to get Kona tapped to throw out a Kozilek. Or in the late game, you can go find your Kozilek at the end step because Kona's died a couple of times. These modal cards are going to be how this deck doesn't just get murdered after Kona dies once, and it can still play the mid to long game.
I'm excited for this deck. I want to see it in person.
Next up, we got just the creepiest little gremlin man. He's just going to come at you. He's going to kick your shins, and he's going to tie your shoelaces together. It's Marvin, Murderous Mimic, 2 mana artifact creature. He's a 2/2, and he has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. So whatever your other stuff can do, Marvin, the murderous little gremlin guy, can also do.
I like how you described him because as you were describing him, I knew what you were going to say, and I still thought you were talking about Stuffy Doll. Because that's how, I don't know, he'll tie your shoelaces together. I don't think about this guy who, is going to, cut my ankles when I sleep.
You know what Marvin goes? He goes, yeah. That's all he ever says.
That's what Amber does.
He's the same thing.
But
Amber's also a gremlin.
But I have just, I saw him and immediately I was like, someone's going to break this real fast.
Yeah, this card looks broken. It just looks like a combo machine. We'll start getting into some of the goofy stuff you can do with it, and you'll be the judge. So the first card we're going to go with is Crystalline Crawler. We obviously want to cram our deck full of creatures with dope activated abilities. This is a 4 mana 1/1. It's got Converge, so it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. Honestly, that's more doable than you might think in a colorless deck. You could still get 2 or 3 on it, and you remove a +1/+1 counter to add a mana of any color, or tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on it.
This is a pretty cool one in here because you're going to be putting counters on Marvin and this too, and then that'll generate a lot of mana. But if you have the remove counter from him to add mana, and you have something else that puts counters on him, that can really go amazing, right?
Yeah, the thing we're going to be trying to assemble is Marvin plus tap ability plus some form of mana production plus untap ability. And a lot of times you can combine the mana production into either the tap or the untap. So in this case, it's like when you tap Marvin, he can now make more mana. And then all you have to do is find a way to untap him and just go, do all that stuff. Another one is Metalworker. 3 mana for a 1/2. You can tap it and reveal any number of artifact cards in your hand and get colorless. For each card revealed this way, well, it's not really too hard to figure out how tapping a creature for 4 to 6 mana might start going infinite. Usually, if you can tap a creature for more than 3 mana, that's sort of the benchmark for going infinite. Marvin has got you.
You're going to be generating so much value with Marvin. I mean, first off, he's an artifact, so it's going to be pretty easy to untap him because he has the untap a creature or artifact line that you can really work with. I feel like that gives it a lot of versatility, which I thought this was going to be tough because he's colorless. I thought I was like, oh, well, maybe there's not as much to do with him in this deck. But no, there's a lot.
Yeah, blue and green, I think, they're going to be able to untap creatures super easily. But there's actually just a lot going on. We're going to get to that at the end. For now, we have Ulamog's Dreadsire. I had to put in one big boy. 10 mana, 10/10, Vigilance, Ward. Sacrifice a permanent with mana value 1 or greater. And tap it, just make a 10/10. Just poop out a 10/10 Eldrazi. So now if you have Marvin, as soon as you play the Dreadsire, it pseudo has haste because we can activate Marvin, get a 10/10, and then every time we untap Marvin, if we're not just winning the game outright with some other combo, we're pooping out 10/10s.
I think mana is going to be pretty easy to get because you have all of the mana producing artifacts. You have the reveal that we just talked about earlier and the crystalline crawler. I think you can power this out way faster than you'd think.
Right, but now we're going to start getting into the cracked cards, if you will. We're going to start with Pilipala. This card is notorious for going infinite with everything. 2 mana, 1/1 flyer, 2, and untap it. Add 1 mana of any color. Well, that's just super convenient because now Marvin's going to have that ability. And the thing that Marvin lets you do, because you could just play all these cards together, you are going to have all of these creatures in play when you go infinite with Marvin, but Marvin's going to already be on the field and sort of give this like a haste enabler already attached to it. So let's just say we've got any mana dork like Palladium Mirror in play. Our Marvin's going to copy that, so we can tap Marvin for 2 mana, make 2 mana, then use the other ability that Marvin has, Pilipala, to untap it and make 1 mana, which lets us do that infinite number of times, producing 1 mana of any color every time we do it. So yes, while we will have all of these individual cards in play, they can't just combo because they need to have multiple abilities. Marvin's going to put it all together and just go, you'd think that this little guy would go, yeah, and tie your shoelaces together, but he's going to fire a nuclear missile at you.
Marvin is going to be such a target for removal. He's going to come down so quickly, too. Imagine the turn 1 Marvin comes like, okay, Soul Ring into Marvin. Oh, that's going to be great.
Oh, my God.
But as I mentioned earlier, he is an artifact and a creature, so you can untap him in multiple ways, like with Clock of Omens. 4 mana for an artifact. If you tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, untap target artifact, which is going to be Marvin in this case.
Yeah, so this doesn't go infinite as easily, but it means that when you're not going infinite, you can still produce very powerful things like with the Dreadsire. Every 2 artifacts you have in play now equals a 10/10, or it now equals a mana. Just all this different stuff can help just generate some value out of him. There's also Umbral Mantle. We can cut all the fancy footwork and just play a 3 mana equipment. Equipped creature has 3, untap. This creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and it equips for nothing. Equips for free. So if Marvin can tap for more than 3 mana, you just do this and you go infinite.
I also like the idea where I guess if you just put this on Marvin, in theory, you could beat with commander damage too if you wanted.
He will be infinity. So if you have no other payoff, you've got an infinite Marvin, and you also will have infinite mana to potentially pump all of your other creatures that have tap abilities that can then untap. So that could be real.
I mean, if someone goes, I'll swing at you with infinity, I'm like, guess I'll just die. That's cool.
Yeah. Lastly, we do want to protect Marvin, so we got Eldritch Immunity in here. Colorless instant. Target creature you control gains protection from each color until end of turn. You can also overload it for 4 and a C. Colorless, so when you go infinite and make Marvin a billion, you can get through that way. But mostly I think you're going to save this as like a counter spell because Marvin, he needs to die.
Yeah, the interaction in this deck will be a little tough in colorless, but I guess you could also use it on the offense. Be like, I guess you can't block my commander. You're dead.
Super real, yeah. What's our next Murderous doll? Totally different deck.
I'm very excited for this one. It's Arabella Abandoned Doll. White-red for a 1/3 artifact creature. When it attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent, and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. I think this is like a very interesting one because, one, this is a crazy line of text for something that comes down for 2 mana. It's a very cool commander. Another is that usually we don't see X damage and gain X life on our commanders when we have attack triggers. Usually it's like closer to like they lose X life and you gain X life. So I think that's like pretty cool to play around with.
I mean, this just does so much for no mana investment. And now that we've got her as our commander, you can believe I'm going to pay 4 mana for this, and I'm going to pay 6 mana for this. 6 mana for this isn't even that bad of a deal. If I can give it haste and I have other dudes in play, which is so trivially easy, then you're going to get zapped by this Arabella, and there's nothing you can really do about it.
This is going to go nuts. This is very cool. But the first thing we're going to be putting in here, the first thing I thought of is Adeline, Resplendent Cathar. She has vigilance, she's 1 white, and her power is equal to the number of creatures you control. Whenever you attack for each opponent, create a 1/1 human that's going to be tapped and attacking that player. But that's going to be snowballing, and you're going to be getting so many creatures out of it, and then Arabella is going to come in and refund you any life you might need back and just deal all this damage to your opponents.
This is how silly this deck can get. You can play nothing on turn 1, Arabella on turn 2, and Adeline on turn 3. You attack with Arabella, trigger so you get your Adeline tokens first, and then all of a sudden all your opponents take 4 damage, you gain 4 life, and then you get to deal 4 damage because you attack with 4 creatures. And since it's turn 3, and some people haven't even taken their turn 3 yet probably, we're just going to get to do that again next turn unless they have very, soon, very early removal.
I mean, the fact that it protects you, too, because usually it's like, okay, dealing X damage, yeah, that's already a pretty good ability, but then you gain X life. It's like, okay, swing back at me, that's fine. Next turn, I'll still be up and you'll still have, be down.
Yeah, wait, what noise do you think Arabella makes?
I feel like it would be kind of like the creepy music box that you don't want to hear when you're alone,
I mean, we're going to need a sample.
Chris, put in a sample.
No, from you.
No. Chris, put in a sample. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The next card that's going to be in here is Loyal Apprentice, 1 red for 2/1 with haste. Beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, which you will, create a 1/1 Thopter with flying, and it has haste until end of turn. Not only can you beat in the air for little bits of damage too, but you're going to be getting extra Arabella triggers too.
Yeah, so you're beating in the air and then beating with Arabella. It just poops out 1/1s every turn. Plus, it itself is that magical power 2 or less. So I play Arabella on turn 2. I play this on turn 3, get a Thopter immediately. Now I'm attacking for 4 damage, and Arabella deals 3 damage to each opponent. So we're dealing 3, 6, 9, 13 damage. We're putting out so much damage with our commander, which is a 2-drop, and literally one other play, like a ham sandwich. And this is only going to get more devastating as the game goes on.
Oh my god, I'm so excited for the next one. Agate Instigator. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'll read it again. 1 in a red for a 1/3 with Offspring, 1 in a red. Whenever another creature you control enters, it deals 1 to each opponent. You're going to be spitting out tokens. This is going to come in twice. This is also going to trigger Arabella because they will both have 1 power.
I think of things like, Secure the Waste, Call the Copper Coats, ways to make a ton of tokens with 1 card. Now, even if Arabella's dead, because she is a must-kill threat for just 2 mana, even if she dies, we have a backup plan to go, great, I've got Perforos, I've got Impact Tremors, I've got Witty Roastmaster, I've got this. Now, die anyway. And so much of this deck is going to be able to punch, but also there's just all of this backup non-combat damage. It makes me think that there's just not going to be a ton of ways to attack this deck outside of just board wiping every turn out of fear.
I think so, too, especially if you can put a Basilisk Collar onto Arabella or something too, because this is damage being dealt. You could gain all that life back plus the life you already dealt from attacking.
Yeah, so if acts as 5, you gain 15 and then 5 because that's just what the ability does.
Yeah, so that's going to be a gigantic life swing overall. There's also Welcoming Vampire, 2 white for a 2/3 with flying. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power 2 or less, that's a magic number, enter, draw a card. Only once each turn, but that won't matter because you'll be keeping your hand filled while also being able to get out your tiny creatures to deal big damage with Arabella.
Yeah, throw in your Mentor of the Meek too. Just make sure you're profiting. I think Rumor Gatherer is another version of this. You're going to play all 3, and now makes it so that when you develop your board, you don't fall behind on cards. So even if someone is going to have to wipe you because it's wipe you or die, even if they get that far, you still just go, cool, still have 7 cards in hand. Arabella, Loyal Apprentice, go ahead.
I'm excited for this deck. I think the next card that I wanted to talk about is a new one. So I think it was made for this deck though. Spike Corridor and Torture Pit. This is a room. Spike Corridor is 3 in a red that says whenever you unlock this door, you create 3 1/1s that when it dies, it deals 1 damage to a target. Torture Pit is 3 in a red. Also, if a source you control will deal non-combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much +2 instead. I thought this was really interesting because that's what I was alluding to earlier, that Arabella deals damage, not loses life for opponents.
Yeah, you can take advantage of damage doublers, damage increasers, but this also just goes absolutely nuts with Agate Instigator. I have 2 of them in place. Instead of taking 2 damage for a creature, it's 6 for each creature. There's no beating that. You have to answer one of these things or you're dead. There's not like, oh, maybe I'll get them in blocks. There won't be blocks. You're just dead.
I want to be using rooms a little more, and I'm so happy that this room fits like perfectly with this commander.
I think this is a sweet one. I think, honestly, the 3 Devils is a little bit more annoying than it looks. Maybe not so much in this deck, but certain decks are going to be able to sacrifice them and just like ping utility creatures. But this might keep you safe if you leave the Devils back on defense and go, fine, you can attack me. I'm going to chump block and kill your Mother of Runes or kill your other thing.
Yeah, and then if they would die, if you want to aim it to somebody's face, it would deal 3 to them every time a Devil dies.
That's also true. Next up, a board wipe, but not for us. It's Dusk Till Dawn, 2 white for a sorcery. Destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, and you can even aftermath it from your graveyard for 3 white to cast Dawn, also a sorcery, and it returns all creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. Feels like it was made custom ordered from Arabella. Like, what does this do that we're not happy about? Kills our Adeline? Oh well.
We always love a good one-sided board wipe, and this one, as Beastie said, is just made for this deck. It fits so well.
Yeah, you're going to wipe all their stuff that could block off the face of the earth, attack for literally billions, and whoever's left alive takes billions more.
And then you'll gain it all right back.
And you gain billions. I mean, how have I not sold you on this deck yet? If we're going to be putting out a bunch of tokens, which is very likely, we can throw in Mondrak, Glory Dominus. It can be indestructible. It's two white for a 4/4, doubles your tokens, and it's got that indestructible ability. Just a nice little cherry on top. I don't think this deck has to play 5 drops, really. Like, we're just going to be so low to the ground. The more I talk about this deck, the more I maybe want to build it. I think what's going to be the tricky decision for me is, should I build Balloon Man or Arabella?
I mean, you need a Boros deck anyways. If you build one, maybe I'll build the other.
Ooh.
Bailoff hasn't seen too much sun lately, so.
Yeah, he's on hiatus. All right, we got to keep moving to a big muscly man. Who is it?
This is Tyvar the Pummeler, 1 green for a 3/3. If you tap another untapped creature you control, he gets indestructible until end of turn, and you also have to tap him. 3 green. Creatures get +X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You want to be getting out gigantic things as fast as possible and then punching with, you know, your little guys that you can also get out, like Mana Dorks or just your little 1/1s, and then those are going to be 10/10s, 12/12s, 13/13s, whatever.
And the most brutal part about this is you just can't be destroyed. There's no, most of the board wipes don't hit him. A lot of the single target removal doesn't hit him. You got to be specific. He does still die to Sword's Path, but you're going to have that, because if Tyvar's in play for any amount of time, he's going to be activating once or multiple times. This feels like an Azuri, but when it works, the payoff is like twice as ridiculous. I mean, the first thing you want to do, though, you got to flood the board with little dudes in ways that are not super taxing on your actual decks. You can't just play like 100 1-drops. You're going to probably play things like Pest Infestation alongside Mana Dorks. This is XX green sorcery. Destroy up to X target artifacts and enchantments. Create twice X black and green 1/1 pests that die into 1 life. So great, we're going to cast this for 1 or 2, get 2 to 4 dudes, and then they're going to just sit there while we sit there and protect Tyvar with their tapping ability, and then, later, +30.
This card is oddly obnoxious. You think that the pests won't matter, and then they do end up mattering quite a lot. And then, if they're pumped to infinity, that's going to be... Those are gonna be the beefiest pests that I've ever seen.
People are gonna walk out of this video and be like, "Dude, Duskmourn is so broken." Nitpicking nerds, they were talking about attacking for billions and giving
and
plus
billions
infinity.
and then gaining a billion.
They said something about I don't know what's going on. Next, Orin Frostfang for making the little dudes. We gotta pay off the little dudes a little bit before we win the game with them outright. 3 green for a 2/6. Attacking creatures I control have Death Touch. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Not only are you not going to want to block Tyvar because he's going to be indestructible, or any of my little dudes because they have Death Touch, but then when you don't do that, I'm going to draw a card. Don't ask questions like, why does a snake have 6 toughness? Just draw all the cards and win the game.
Everyone feels so bad when it's like, here's a 1/1 with Death Touch, and even if they didn't have the pump effect on board, they are still going to think about whether they're going to block the 1/1 with Death Touch, because it feels bad.
That's the other thing we didn't even mention, is that Tyvar's ability is not sorcery speed. I can attack, do all the math in my head, send all of the creatures in, And then my opponents now have to do the math, which they can feel free to mess up, by the way. Please make as many mistakes as you want, because if you forget that I have it, or you block wrong and you think that I don't have it, and then I activate it, you lose.
It's going to, I feel like, yeah, the death touch, the draw card, it kind of like fuels itself as long as you can get the mana out, which is going to be easy with Fanatic of Ronus. 1 a green for a 1/4. You could tap him to add green, or you could tap him to add green, 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 only if you have a creature with power 4 or greater. And you can also eternalize, so if they kill him, it was not the end.
Yeah, I mean, that was just such a good segue. I really, really like that one. Premium work. I thought it was great. I just had to communicate
Thank
that.
you.
And then even if he dies, like you said, he fuels himself in the afterlife, because now he's a 4/4 and he can just tap for 4. This is just a great way to power out Tyvar, power out your boys, power out things like Garruk's Uprising, 2 and a green enchantment. When it enters, if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. That's actually huge. And then whenever a creature enters now, again, with 4 power, you draw more cards. The trample is huge because Tyvar does not give trample like you think he maybe would or should. That maybe helps balance the card out. We don't need everything. We can play a few cards to power him up before we win the game anyway.
Trample is going to be so important because, there's always at least one person at the table who's like has a 1/1. It's like, okay, I'll block with the 1/1. And you're like, oh, okay, well, my 13/13 gets blocked by the 1/1. You take nothing. But not anymore with Garruk's Uprising.
Yeah, also, if we're making big dudes, which we will get to, I promise, Rich Card's Expertise, 4 green sorcery. Draw cards equal to your biggest dude. Cast a spell 5 or less for free from your hand. This is a great way to refill after you flood the board with Mana Dorks, Tyvar, Pest Infestation, and maybe one guy. Draw your cards. Now you're back in business. Your commander's virtually indestructible. You don't have too many worries.
You're going to be getting some very good spells off of this, but if you need even more cards, how can this be a Nitpicking Nerds video without an MDFC? Disciple of Fraelis is going to go hard in this deck. 3 green, green, green for a 3/3. When it enters, you could sack another creature, the gigantic one. If you do, you're going to gain X life and draw X cards where X is that creature's power. You know how good that's going to feel if you sack a 1/1 that is a 12/12 at the moment and draw 12, gain 12, and it's like, oh, well, that was a free token. Feels good.
And now you're not even going to die to a backswing because you have a 3/3 blocker, plus you just gain 10 plus life. There's a lot to love here. And if you want big boys, look, there's a lot of different big boys, but we're going to talk about Ghalta, Primal Hunger, because it's the biggest boy for the least amount of mana. 10 green, green for a 12/12, but it costs X less, where X is the total power of creatures you control. And it has trample. I just think this is going to be one of the best ways. If you want more big boys, Primeval Protector is another one that comes down very, very cheap. These come out, you've spent very little mana. Cool, I have 5 left. Activate Tyvar, give my team +12/+12 or +10/+10. The game is simply over. You only need 5 or 6 creatures to kill 2 people.
I mean, it's also going to be very powerful too, because even if you don't have Garruk's Uprising at the moment, Ghalta will also get +12/+12, and it will have trample on itself. So swinging in with a 24 Ghalta with trample, that's already very, very good. And then also they'll be dealing with a bunch of 1/1s that also have +12/+12.
Yeah, I think Tyvar is going to be really scary. The fact that he gives you this all awesome overrun ability is already good, but that virtually being indestructible as long as you have 1 or 2 other creatures untapped, that's going to be a real groan test sometimes. The green commanders in Duskmourn, they are hitting you hard. They're not apologizing, and you got to have an answer within 3 seconds or you're dead.
I think there's going to be tons of powerful decks coming out of this set.
Like Aminatou, Veil Piercer. This is 1 blue, white, black for a 2/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, Surveil 2. Each enchantment card in your hand has Miracle. Its Miracle cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 4. This is not necessarily a Miracles deck, but it's an enchantment deck that can draw a bunch of different cards at instant speed to trigger that Miracle first draw each turn as many times in a turn cycle as possible and get huge reduction.
I think the most important part is that Miracle does cheat timing restrictions. So if your enchantments don't have flash, you can still play them with that reduced Miracle cost, even if you drew them on an opponent's turn.
Could you maybe think of a classic Miracle card that might help with that?
How about Sensei's Divining Top? One for an artifact. If you pay 1, you can look at the top 3 and then put them back in any order. Stack the top so you get the best card on top. And then if you tap it, you draw a card and then put the top on the top of its owner's library. So you're going to draw the best card for 1 mana, and then you can play it because it will be the first card you drew that turn if it's on anybody else's turn.
Yeah, just don't do it on your turn and then get the 4 reduction. I mean, Sensei's Divining Top, it's a classic. We also have to move to a card very good for this deck, specifically Greed. 3 and a black, enchantment, which means we can miracle it for a single black, and also pay a black and 2 life to draw a card. This can be done on anyone's turn, which means this is your one-stop shop for miracle draw every single turn. As long as you have an enchantment on top, then you can miracle draw with this for very little.
Just getting greed out for a single black is going to be so much value, and it's going to, I'm gonna groan if I see that. The next one is Arcane Denial, because why wouldn't your interaction also have card draw staple onto it? When a blue for an instant, you counter target spell, its controller can draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next upkeep, but you also draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and then you can play it for its reduced cost.
Right. I mean, as soon as that turn starts, you go, all right, maybe I know what the top card is. Maybe I'm just going to get lucky because I have 30 enchantments in my deck. Boom, miracle. My counterspell did that. We're still seeing the impact of my counterspell a whole turn later. Pretty sweet. Another sick, nasty way to get enchantments on top of your deck that doesn't even cost you a spell slot. Hall of Heliod's Generosity. Taps for colorless, or you pay 1 white, tap it, put an enchantment on top of your library from your graveyard. This is a little scary for your opponents because it is face-up information. In my experience, most people just forget you have it in the first place, and then they go, oh no, and you go, whatever, miracle. But it is something to consider, but they also don't know what you want at any given moment. If you've got 6 enchantments in your graveyard, they don't necessarily know what you want back.
I love this too because it is not a one-time use like a lot of the like Enlightened tutors and that sort of thing. This is, if you have the mana and this is untapped, you could do this once per turn cycle, and then if you have a way to draw a card, okay, well, that's going to be, my best thing that got killed. It's going to come right back, and you're going to have to deal with it all over again.
I mean, it's a little disheartening, right? If somebody has a Smothering Tithe, and you guys are working together to kill it, and they just go, all right, Hall of Heliod's Generosity on your turn, on your upkeep, put it on top, activate Greed, draw it, play it for 1 mana, go, trigger on Smothering Tithe, you're just like, what is happening? That basically is just an engine that fuels itself.
I mean, is this not just the perfect argument for like single target land destruction?
But not for Field of the Dead. Don't destroy Field of the Dead.
No, do it.
What about the next one?
The next one is Ondu Spirit Dancer, 4 and a white for a 3/3. Whenever enchantment you control enters, you could create a token copy of it, but only once each turn. But it doesn't say only once during each of your turns, it's once during every turn. So, because you're going to be miracling everything out, you're going to be getting 1 free enchantment per turn because of that cost reduction and the fact that you're just going to be drawing and playing a ton.
Yeah, this is going to be triggering all of our enchantment entering things, and you might be saying, Beastie, what are you talking about? You haven't talked about any enchantment triggering things. Hold your phone. Archon of Sun's Grace. 2 white for a 3/4. Flying. Lifelink. Pegasus creatures you control have lifelink. Constellation. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, you get a 2/2 white Pegasus. So now when we're doing and spinning all our wheels, throwing down Omen of the Seas, drawing cards off Arcane Denial and Greed, flashing in enchantments for like 2 quarters of a mana, we're just going to be getting 2/2s and flying over in the skies.
I mean, not just 2/2s flying over in the skies, 2/2s flying over the skies that you're also gaining life from, because they all have lifelink.
Infinity life. We're going to be tagging
10 billion
a
life.
bajillion, squillion. All
but
right.
They'll have less than 10 billion life with Grim Guardian, 2 and a black for a 1/4 with Constellation. When it or another enchantment you control enters, each opponent loses 1 life. So if the Pegasus beats were not enough, you can also just be having everyone lose life. And ooh, you killed my best enchantment. It's going to come back down. You guys will lose a life again. That'll be extra disheartening if you have the Smothering Tithe come out. Oh, you also take 1. Everyone loses 1 life from it.
Yeah, and it's also nice to have the payoffs for playing enchantments be enchantments themselves so that we can actually discount them with Aminatou. I know there's a few versions of Grim Guardian. There might be a new one that isn't an enchantment, and I don't like that one as much. I think you get a lot of utility by increasing the critical mass of enchantments that you can miracle out so that you don't waste it. When you have to draw a card in the blind on somebody else's turn and you draw like the non-enchantment version of this, you just go, oh, I don't want you.
I mean, it's the difference between like making sure your cost reduction in our for enchantments are enchantments in of themselves, or the enchantresses that draw you cards are also enchantments. It just fuels your deck and makes your just process go along that much smoother.
Yeah, that's the one thing I would also recommend about this deck too is if you're going to play enchantment reducers, make sure they're enchantments. I think that just goes a long way to help tie the deck together. I don't like the non-enchantment ones all that much. But you know what I do like? More Duskmourn content. The house always breaks even, and you're about to find out that that's true in this video.
Right here.